This is part 3 of my Bible series on the sons of God and the daughters of men. In the previous 2 classes, we talked about the history of Israel and the line of David and how the royalty of Israel integrated themselves with the pagans, and this caused the destruction of the kingdom. And we found many parallels between the history of Israel and Genesis 6, 1 through 7. Today we're going to continue to look through the Bible and find more stories that show us how dangerous it is for the followers of God to marry those who do not follow God and have no relationship with God. In the previous class, I read Deuteronomy 13. God told the Israelites before they became a monarchy, "If thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or the wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is as thine own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, Let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers, namely of the gods of the people which are round about you, nigh unto thee, or far off from thee, from the one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth, thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him, neither shalt thine eye pity him, neither shalt thou spare, neither shalt thou conceal, but thou shalt surely kill him. Thine hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. And thou shalt stone him with stones, that he die, because he has sought to thrust thee away from the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. And all Israel shall hear and fear, and shall do no more any such wickedness as this is among you." Well, the Israelites didn't really obey that commandment, because when Solomon started to worship false gods, they didn't destroy him. God was very clear that if anybody worshiped a false god, then they were to be destroyed. But the reason that they did not destroy Solomon is because he was the king. He was too powerful. And Rehoboam, his son, was the king. And Ahab was the king of the northern tribes of Israel. And so the people could not follow God's commandments because the royalty of Israel were above the law. And that's generally the way it is with most leaders in countries. They don't really have to follow the law if they don't want to. Another example of this is David. Although David didn't worship other gods, he did commit adultery and murder a man. And the penalty for both of those violations, according to God, was death. But David was not put to death by the Israelites because he was, like all the other kings, above the law. Now, God did punish him in his own way over time, but we find this phenomenon where the royalty, the leaders of a country, are above the law. And so the Israelites went after false gods and they married pagans, and nothing happened to them. So the kingdoms became corrupt and eventually fell apart. In Ezra 9, remember we talked about the Jews that returned to Jerusalem after their captivity in Babylon. And these returning Jews started to marry pagans. They were doing the same thing that the Israelites had done hundreds of years previously to destroy the kingdom. And it says in Ezra 9 that the hand of the princes and the rulers have been chief in this trespass. It's very common for the rich and the powerful to be above the law and to take multiple wives. Polygamy was something that was done by the elites in Israel. Again, you see this phenomenon throughout the Bible. And again, we see these parallels between what happened to the Israelites and the Judeans and the pre-flood people. The children of the pre-flood people were the mighty and renowned, just as the princes and the rulers were taking pagan wives at the time of Ezra, and the royalty of Israel were taking pagan wives throughout the history of the line of David. Remember, it also says that the sons of God in Genesis 6 took them wives of all which they chose. as we mentioned in the previous video, this is most likely talking about polygamy. Well, David, Solomon, Rehoboam, and just about every king of Israel took part in polygamy. So at this point, we're going to continue to go through the stories of the Bible, and we're not going to go through every story in detail because it would make this video series too long, but there are many, many stories that show how dangerous it is, again, to marry the pagans and to integrate them. One example of this is Samson. God came and visited Samson's parents during the time of the judges. This is before Israel became a monarchy. And he told them that they would have a child, and this child was going to be special somehow. God told them that he would be a Nazirite, and he was not to drink wine or eat grapes. And the man that was Samson's father was from the tribe of Dan. And when Samson grew up, he was given superhuman strength. Samson was the only man that is recorded in history to have taken the vow of a Nazirite. So God gave him superhuman strength, and he was able to kill 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. They couldn't do anything. He was too strong. He was untouchable. But you're going to find that Samson made a huge mistake. Even though he was untouchable and so powerful that nobody could really lay a hand on him, he married a Philistine. He saw that there was a Philistine that was very beautiful, and he married her. And remember, the Israelites were not allowed to marry Philistines or any other pagans, whether it be the Zidonians or the Ammonites or the Moabites or the Hittites or the Edomites. They were not allowed to marry pagans. So Samson was making a huge mistake, and Judges 14 verse 3 says, "His father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines?" So Samson's parents knew that this was a mistake. And when Samson married this Philistine, through a course of events, his life started to unravel. He started to have a lot of problems. And this woman would actually eventually end up being killed. And I think that God did this to actually save Samson, because he knew Samson was going down the wrong road. So God tried to preserve him, tried to keep him away from this Philistine woman. But unfortunately, he didn't learn his lesson. He then mingled himself with a woman named Delilah. Now, we don't know the nationality of Delilah, but you can read the story that Delilah was very deceitful, and she tried to trick Samson, and she ended up having the Philistines arrest Samson, and she discovered the source of his power, his spirit, and eventually Samson was arrested, and they ripped his eyes out, and he ended up committing suicide. So here we have another example where you've got a man who is untouchable, who's powerful, who is influential and has the potential to serve God, but then he marries these pagans, he mingles with them, and they end up resulting in his horrible death. Now, there's a story in Judges relating to Samson that I think it's relevant for us to study. Something occurred that most Christians probably don't really understand. And it's not really clear why the Bible writer even recorded this story. But for you and me, we can know what this story actually means and why the Bible writer left it in the book of Judges, or why he recorded it. At the time that Samson is inquiring about this Philistine woman, a lion actually tries to attack him. And he catches the lion and he rips it apart. Again, Samson had superhuman strength. So the lion carcass is just lying there, and he leaves it. And he goes and inquires about this Philistine woman, and he comes back, and he finds that some bees have nested in the lion carcass. And so he actually takes some of the honey from the carcass, and eats it himself, and then he takes it and gives it to his parents, but he doesn't tell his parents where he got the honey. Then when Samson meets with the Philistines, he gives them a riddle to solve about this event, but they can't understand the riddle, and they become angry at him because they can't understand what exactly the riddle is referring to, because they have no idea that he's referring to this lion in this beehive. And so it's kind of interesting, because here we are thousands of years later, and most Christians read this story and they don't understand what it means. But again, you and me are going to be able to explain what this story actually means. Lions were unclean. Cats are unclean animals. The Israelites are not supposed to eat them. They're unclean meat. Furthermore, the Israelites were not supposed to eat from a dead carcass. In fact, just about everybody knows that. If somebody found some honey and gave it to you and then said that they found it in the carcass of a dead lion, you'd probably be horrified. Why did you give me this? Well, Samson was taking something very sweet from something that was incredibly unclean. It was unclean meat, and it was from a dead carcass. Then he took that honey and he infected, so to speak, or he defiled his parents by giving them some of that honey. So what this story is doing is it's telling us exactly what Samson is doing with this Philistine woman. He's attracted to this woman. He finds her to be very beautiful, and so he's getting something sweet from something unclean, which is the Philistine culture, the Philistine people. And by doing this, he's not only defiling himself, and the same is true with Delilah, who ended up having him killed. He's not only defiling himself with these women, but he's also affecting his parents, because when Samson had his eyes ripped out, and when he was imprisoned, and eventually he died, this greatly affected his parents also, because they lost their son. So we have another example showing the dangers of mingling with the pagans. Again, Samson was untouchable. He was invincible until he mingled with these pagan women. Proverbs 23 says, "A strange woman is a narrow pit. She also lieth in wait as for a prey, and increaseth the transgressors among men." Another example I'd like to refer to is the Song of Solomon. I have a separate video on the Song of Solomon if you want to go into that in detail. Many people are kind of perplexed about the purpose for this book in the Bible. Some people say that it's an allegory of Christ's relationship with the church, but I can assure you that that is not what it is. The Song of Solomon was actually entitled the Song of Songs, meaning the author of the book, who is Solomon, believed that this book, the Song of Solomon, was the greatest of all songs. But the Bible translators, they changed the title of the book to the Song of Solomon, because to the translators, this book was really just a song telling us about Solomon's personal life. It wasn't the greatest of all songs. It was simply a song that was Solomon's personal favorite. And when you read the book, it's all about Solomon's relationship with his wife, or you're going to find it's actually multiple women who are probably participating in the authorship of the book. But the entire book is just a love song between Solomon and his wives. It doesn't mention God even one time. And remember the story of Solomon. Solomon married 1,000 wives, and he was completely distracted by these women to the point where they caused him to break the first commandment. And if you read the book, Solomon calls this woman who's featured in the book the fairest among women. The entire book is about her natural beauty. Remember, the sons of God, they saw the daughters of men that they were fair. That's why they married the daughters of men, because of their beauty. And in the Song of Solomon, we find that during the time that this book was written, he had actually 140 wives, so he was already engaging in polygamy. So here we have an entire book that is devoted to this idea of a man being distracted with excess women. He's engaging in polygamy, and he's doing this because the women are beautiful, and he's completely distracted to the point where the King James translators called the book the Song of Solomon, meaning it was the song of his heart. His heart was consumed with these women. And of course, we know what happened to Solomon. He turned away from God. Another example of the dangers of marrying pagans is the story of Esau. Remember, Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob and Esau. Jacob was the one who he retained the knowledge of God, and his descendants gave us the Bible. But Esau, his people, did not retain the knowledge of God at all. And the reason that his people didn't retain the knowledge of God, well, there was two reasons. One reason is that he married two Hittite women. The Hittites were some of those people that God told the Israelites not to mingle themselves with. So these women were most likely causing their children to go after false gods. Rebekah, the mother of Esau, said to Isaac, her husband, "I'm weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob take a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these which are of the daughters of the land, what good shall my life do me?" The second reason that Esau's descendants turned away from God is that Esau was an impulsive man, so he would do whatever felt good at that particular time. And so most likely he was easily converted into the pagan culture of his Hittite wives. And so Esau's descendants, who we know as the Edomites, were some of those people who the Israelites were told not to marry. Genesis 26:34 says, Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Bashmath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and to Rebekah. So Isaac and Rebekah knew that these Hittite women were a bad choice for Esau. Another example of the dangers of marrying pagans is the story of Lot. Now, Lot was related to Abraham, but Abraham and Lot, if you recall, separated because there was not enough room in their area to stay together, so they decided to part ways. And Lot, unfortunately, went to the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, those two cities, and there's no evidence that Lot had a wife before he entered Sodom and Gomorrah. It's very possible that he found his wife in those cities. But even if he didn't find his wife there, he raised up his children in those cities. And because his children were raised there, they were very influenced by paganism. And the story tells us that the angel visitors came and rescued Lot. And him and his daughters and his wife left the city because they were told that it was going to be destroyed. And as they were moving out of Sodom and Gomorrah, they were told not to look back, but Lot's wife looked back, and she turned into a pillar of salt. It's very possible that the reason she looked back is that that was the place where she grew up. That was her home, her people, and she couldn't resist looking back, and that's why she died. Now, Lot goes into a cave, and he's there with his daughters, and one reason that we should believe that his daughters were pagan and that they were raised with uncivilized people, the Sodomites and the people of Gomorrah, is because they then proceeded to have an incestuous relationship with their father. And those relationships brought forth Moab and Benami. Moab was the father of the Moabites, and Benami was the father of the Ammonites. And remember, the Ammonites caused a lot of trouble, as well as the Moabites, for the Israelites. Remember, Solomon's Ammonite and Moabite wives caused him to go after false gods. And Solomon's chief wife, the queen, was an Ammonite named Naamah, and her descendants would be the kings of Judah for hundreds and hundreds of years, committing all kinds of unspeakable evil. So we have another example where the Moabites and the Ammonites were pagan people that were created from an inappropriate marriage with Lot and this woman who most likely came from Sodom and Gomorrah or was heavily influenced by them. And these descendants, the Ammonites and the Moabites, not only caused problems with the Israelites in terms of war, but also caused problem because of the horrible infiltration throughout the history of Israel. Now, as I mentioned, Jacob, he retained the knowledge of God. Esau married Hittites, and his people did not retain the knowledge of God, but Jacob married people of his own family who had the same God. In fact, the entire line of Abraham down to Jacob stayed pure. According to Abraham, his wife Sarah was his half-sister on his father's side, and by various scriptures in Genesis, we know that Isaac's wife Rebekah was a close relative of Abraham. Nahor, Abraham's brother, begot Bethel, and Bethel begot Laban and Rebekah, and Laban begot Rachel and Leah, Jacob's wives. Thus, it's likely that these women knew the true God because of their close blood relationships to Abraham. Now, if close relations like this happened today, marriages within these close relationships, we would refer to that as inbreeding, and it is inbreeding, but 4,000 years ago, the gene pool was not as corrupt as it is today, so that wouldn't really matter. But the point is, those people married individuals who were, they had the same God, so they were not as likely to become corrupt. Abraham, given that he was chosen to be the one to spread the word of God throughout the world, had to be especially careful when he chose a wife for his son Isaac. So when he sent his servant to find Isaac a wife, he said, "I will make thee swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but thou shalt go unto my country and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac." We have another story in Genesis, chapter 38. This is a chapter that you'll hardly ever hear anybody do a Bible study on. It's the story of Tamar and Judah. I'm going to do another video on this chapter because it really warrants an entire video, but now I'm just going to briefly touch on it. Jacob had 12 sons, and Judah was the most important son because his descendants would bring us the Bible and most of the kings of Israel. And Jesus was descended from the tribe of Judah. So if the thesis that we've been promoting about Genesis 6, 1 through 7 is really true, that the followers of God marrying people who didn't follow God was really the catalyst that destroyed the pre-flood people and the people of Israel, then it should be particularly important to us who Judah marries, because his descendants are going to remain more pure than any Israelite or anybody in the history of the world. So who does Judah marry? Who is his wife? Well, Judah married a Canaanite. That's not good. How could Judah marry a Canaanite if he was going to remain pure? The Canaanites were evil. God would have the Israelites return and destroy the Canaanites, so this doesn't really make any sense. But in this chapter of Genesis, we find that this Canaanite woman would actually die. She died for whatever reason. And so Judah lost his wife pretty early, but before she died, she had 3 children with Judah. The first child, we're told, was so evil that God destroyed him. And the second child was so evil that God destroyed him also. And the third child survived, but you can see that God changed Judah's path. he was going to build his family with this Canaanite woman, but God changed his direction and turned him away from these pagan influences. There was a woman named Tamar who Judah took for his first son, but when his first son was killed, the tradition at the time in the Middle East was to take that woman and give her to the next youngest brother. But when that next youngest brother refused to have children with Tamar, God destroyed him. God was very displeased with this. So then Judah promised Tamar to his youngest son. But the problem was he was too young, so he said, wait a while until he grows up, and then you'll be given to the third son. But over time, Tamar realized that the third son apparently didn't have any interest in her. So she became distraught, and she decided to take matters into her own hands. So she dressed up as a prostitute and displayed herself for Judah, and Judah saw her and decided to hire her, and they spent the night together. And in the morning, Judah said, I'd like to pay you, but I don't have anything on me. And so she said, give me your signet and your staff, and then when you find the money, you can come back and I'll give you your things back, and you can pay me then. So he left, got the money, came back, but she wasn't there. And he asked around and tried to find her, but he could not find her. So then, many months later, Judah finds out that Tamar is pregnant. And by the way, in those days, apparently they wore veils. So Judah did not know that it was Tamar. I know that seems crazy, but in those days they did things differently. So he didn't know that it was Tamar, but he found Tamar was pregnant. And he proclaimed that she should be burned. She should be killed because of her fornication. But then she held out the staff and the signet and said, I am pregnant of the person that owns these things. And Judah realized that it was him and that he had been tricked. And he proclaimed that Tamar had been more righteous than him. So Tamar got the victory over Judah, and Tamar gave birth to her child, but her child ended up being twins. And so she was greatly blessed after all this turmoil that she had to go through. And one of those twins ended up being the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of Jesus. And her descendants raised up the people who would bring us the Bible, and most of the kings of Israel. So here we have another example, but this is a special example because God did not destroy Judah. He simply corrected his path. Here we have the most important man in terms of the lineage of people that would bring us the Bible, but he went astray and married a Canaanite, and God turned him away from that and gave him a wife that was worthy, even though he didn't love Tamar, and he didn't have relations with her after that one encounter. But those twins that he would raise up, along with his third son from the first wife, they would make up the tribe of Judah. Now, we don't know the nationality of Tamar. She might have been an Israelite. She might have been related to the Hebrews, but she may not have been related to them. We don't know exactly where she came from. But we do know that God favored her greatly. Just because a woman may not be of Hebrew blood doesn't mean that she will not be chosen. Some examples of that are Ruth and Rahab. Ruth was a Moabite, but she is in the line of Jesus. Because if you read the book of Ruth chapter 1, verse 15, it says, she, that is Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to Ruth, behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back and unto her people, and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. So Ruth proclaimed that she was changing religions, and apparently she was sincere about this, because she would be one of the women in the line of Jesus. Most women in the chronologies are not mentioned by name, but Ruth was one of the few that was mentioned by name. Another example of this, even before Ruth, is Rahab. When the Israelites came into the Promised Land, they first attacked the city of Jericho, and they sent spies, and this woman Rahab helped the spies to protect them. And Rahab is in the line of Jesus. We're not 100% sure that this is the same Rahab, but it's probably the same woman. She was not an Israelite, but she was given great honor because she proclaimed to the spies, Joshua 2:9, "For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath." So she proclaimed that the God of Israel, the living God, was the true God, and that's why she was given the honor of being in the lineage of Jesus. One more example that we can talk about that demonstrates the importance of marrying people who are dedicated to God is the story of Moses and Zipporah. Exodus 4:19 and verses 24 through 26 says, "And the Lord said unto Moses and Midian, Go, return into Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. And Moses took his wife and his sons, and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And it came to pass by the way in the inn, that the Lord met him, and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone, and cut off the foreskin of her son, and cast it at his feet, and said, Surely a bloody husband art thou to me. So he let him go," meaning God let him go. "Then she said, A bloody husband thou art, because of the circumcision." Now, this passage in the Bible is leaving a lot of information out. So people get very confused for that reason. You have to fill in the blanks of what's occurring, because the writer, for whatever reason, didn't really add a lot of detail here. Apparently what happened was God came to Moses, and he told him, "You have to circumcise your son." But Zipporah, his wife, was not an Israelite. She was a Midianite. The Midianites were descendants of Abraham, but they were not descendants of Sarah. They were descendants of another wife of Abraham. And so Zipporah refused to allow her son to be circumcised, because if you're not a Christian and you're not a Jew, you can see why cutting off a part of your baby's genitals would be frowned upon. So she absolutely refused to allow Moses to do this. But circumcision was a token of the covenant that God had with Abraham's descendants through Jacob, that they would come back into the Promised Land, and Moses was going to lead them into the Promised Land. So for his own son not to be circumcised was sort of an abomination to God, and God took him and was ready to kill Moses because his son was not circumcised. So you can imagine the arguments that Moses and Zipporah had before this event. They probably argued bitterly about this, and finally when God took Moses and prepared to kill him, Zipporah reluctantly and disdainfully performed the circumcision right there at the scene, and threw the bloody foreskin at Moses' feet, and said again, "Surely a bloody husband art thou to me. A bloody husband thou art, because of the circumcision." So the reason for mentioning this is to get people to understand the horrible division among families that's caused because people do not have the same God. Technically, Zipporah and Moses did have the same God because they were both descendants of Abraham, but Zipporah just didn't know about circumcision. She didn't understand the benign nature of it. And for that reason, we have this horrible, horrible strife that you see. And so, again, The thesis of this Bible series is that Genesis 6 is talking about the problems that are caused when you have the followers of God marrying people who do not know God or do not follow God or have not received the same commandments and they don't have the same traditions. You can see the difficulty that results. So here we have many other stories, as you can tell, throughout the Bible that shows the danger of followers of God marrying those who didn't follow God, and you can see the parallels between Genesis 6, 1 through 7. Many of these people were destroyed. Samson was destroyed. Solomon broke the first commandment. Esau's descendants forgot God and became pagans who were enemies of Israel. Lot's descendants, Moab and Ben-Ammi, the father of the Ammonites, they all became pagans. We just have so many examples of what happens, and the last example I'll give is the fall of Adam. Adam had a choice. When Eve took of the fruit, he could have chosen to follow God's commandments and turn away from Eve, or he could follow the example of Eve. And when he ate of that fruit, he corrupted himself. We're told that Adam was not deceived. The woman was deceived. The serpent was made after Adam, so Adam could not be deceived by the serpent. But the serpent was made before Eve, so she was deceived by the snake. And so Adam chose to follow his wife, but it's very clear that in doing this he was corrupted, and he was sentenced to death. So we have many other examples in the Bible that show us that what we're studying here is really one of the main themes in the history of the world, the triune relationship between God, man, and the woman. And Genesis 6 really is talking about marriage and the destruction that can occur if the family is not founded on the knowledge of God. So in the next video, we're going to talk about the sons of God, most likely, the phrase sons of God, that is. We haven't had time to do that yet. And many other things relating to this general theme. We're going to use this thesis that we've developed in this Bible series to help us understand difficult chapters of the Bible, such as Revelation 14. So I'll look forward to seeing you in part 4 of this Bible series.